So a while back I did a video talking about horror books that I never planned to read, and a lot of you enjoyed that. I got a lot of good feedback on that video, so I wanted the same thing for science fiction. So this essentially is an anti-TBR, or books that I never planned to read and review, but really I will never say never. So in the comments, if you think I'm making a mistake with one of these books, let me know, try to persuade me, and I am open to changing my mind. All that being said, let's get into the books. First, let's talk about The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, and this of course is a beloved book, and part of the reason I wanted to read it is the fact that I just don't think I'm going to love it, and I don't really feel like reviewing something that everyone else adores and just finding it to be just okay. Essentially, my tastes lean towards the dark and disturbing, and this book is known for being really absurd and ridiculous and funny, which just aren't my buzzwords when it comes to books. I have technically started this book. I believe I read the first couple chapters back in high school, and I'll be honest, I think the first chapter, I remember it being decently funny and has a great setup, but when it comes to humor in books, I quickly get bored of it. I find it to be almost too sickly sweet, and if this book had maybe been a novella, I'd feel differently, but as a full book, I read onwards and remember just finding it too much. And knowing my tastes have turned darker since then, I just don't think this book is for me. So again, if I read this book, it probably would be a 3-star read. I don't think I would hate it, but I don't have a lot of motivation to read something that I don't think I'm going to overly enjoy, and just simply something that's not to my taste when everyone else loves it because they love that kind of absurd British style humor. So not for me. I think I'm going to pass on this one. Next up is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini, and this is a book that got so much buzz when it came out because of course this author has written previous fantasy books that are very beloved. I've never read those, but I did get an e-arc of this book when it came out, and so I read the first maybe 10% of it and I got bored. I remember the premise that involves a young woman who discovers some kind of alien artifact, and in terms of premise it sounded like something that'd be right up my alley, but I just remember being so long and so average. I really struggle with mediocre science fiction where the story just feels like the author doesn't really understand or appreciate the science fiction genre and instead just sets a book in space or in the future and assumes that it's great science fiction because of that, and it kind of misses a lot of the point, a lot of the development, the ideas, the technology, the exploration of ideas that makes science fiction one of my favorite genres. So I just found the book to be really flat. Again, I didn't actually get very far in, but I have very little motivation to go back to it. So if you love this book, if you love this series, let me know. Maybe you can sway my opinion, but I wasn't impressed by my first pass. Next up, we have a booktube darling, and that is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. And this is the first book in a series that has been pitched as lesbian necromancers in space, and that certainly sounds up my alley. Again, I've talked about my love for dark fiction, so the idea of a story involving necromancy sounds amazing, and of course it has a unique storyline to it. It's supposed to be just very out of the box, which again are things that normally are buzzwords for me, but I've tried reading this one a few times and I really can't get into it. I tried reading it as a physical book, I tried the audio because people love the narration, and it just has never worked for me. It's never clicked, and I've just never pushed myself to get further into the book because I don't think I'm going to love it. Again, I love the premise of this one, but I do know it's a very controversial book. I've seen people who give it 5 stars. I've seen people giving it a lot lower stars. So I just feel like I'm going to end up not loving it myself, and so I'm not very motivated to push through a book just to tell you that it's just okay when other people love it, and it's just simply not for me. Then let's talk about Count Zero by William Gibson, and really this is a placeholder for pretty much all of this author's work. I have read Neuromancer and I didn't really connect with the story. I didn't really get the appeal to it. I appreciate that it is an important place in terms of the foundations of the subgenre of cyberpunk, but as a novel, as a reading experience, I didn't have a very fun time. So needless to say, all of William Gibson's other books have fallen very low on my TBR. Again, I'll never say never. Maybe I'll try one out if it's part of a buddy read with my book club or something. But by myself, I'm not that motivated to pick up his books until I read pretty much every other classic out there. It's just something that I don't think is going to work for me. Based off of my very troubled experience with Neuromancer, I wanted to love that book. Trust me, I tried. but I didn't. Maybe one day I will reread Neuromancer and my feelings will change, but until that day comes, I'm not in a rush to read more of this author's work, only to not enjoy it. Then we have the Atrocity Archives by Charles Stross, and this once again is more of a stand-in for all of this author's work because I've started and stopped several of their books, but this series particular has been recommended to me so many times. I have a love for authors like Peter Watts and Neil Stephenson, and when I go online, when I go places like Reddit, everyone says that if you love those authors, I should definitely check out Charles Stross, and I've tried and I can't even get into the first chapters of his books. I believe this series in particular is very goofy and funny, which again are not things that particularly draw me in. So I just don't think he's necessarily for me. I just find his storytelling or something about his writing very off-putting. But again, I see amazing gushing reviews online on Reddit, places like that. So you all know my taste. Should I give him another try? I'm reluctant to do so, but if you give me a really good pitch in the comments, you might be able to sway my mind to give him another try. And if so, let me know if I should start with this series or somewhere else. Then let's talk about Never Let Me Go by Kuro Ashiguri. And this is a book I have tried so many times. This is a piece of literary science fiction, which is a subgenre I typically adore. And I've read another book by this author, Clara and the Sun, which I really liked. And so I've always thought that I would love this book. But I have tried at least 3 times to read this book. I believe I've tried the audio, I've tried the physical book, and for whatever reason, I can't get into it. I unfortunately have been spoiled about what this book is about, but even people who have already read the book assure me that knowing the twist doesn't really take away from their enjoyment of the book because it's more the experience of reading and hearing and experiencing the story rather than being surprised by what is going to come and what is going to happen. I've tried watching the movie. I didn't really get into that either. So I don't know if this book is just the wrong time, if I should keep trying it again, or if it's just, again, not for me. I don't love every literary classic book when it comes to science fiction, but this one definitely sounds like I should love it based off the other books I've really enjoyed that are compared to this one. But I don't know, how many times do you keep trying a book before you officially give up on it? Let me know. Next up is This Is How We Lose the Time War, which is a sci-fi novella that follows 2 women on opposite sides of this time war. There is time travel involved in this story, and they start to have a bit of a queer romance between the 2 of them. In terms of buzzwords, this sounds right up my alley. The idea that it has a queer romance to it, which is something I look for in stories, but also a time travel element. I thought I was gonna love this one. I tried reading it years ago. I got, again, a little far in and I just gave up. I just wanted more plot. I remember there being very, very little plot. The book is not really what I thought it was gonna be. I thought it would be this like time travel, exciting adventure. And instead it's more these like slow love letters between these 2 characters. And while I appreciate a queer romance, I don't want to read a romance story. I'm okay reading a science fiction story that has queer romance, but I want a plot. I want my sci-fi, I want my time travel, and those elements were just in the back of the story, at least as far as I got in the book. So again, if that changes, if you think I will love this one, please convince me otherwise. But for now, this one is in my no read list category because I don't think I'm gonna love it. Then I want to talk about Space Opera by Catherine M. Valente, and this is a book that I've never actually tried reading because I heard that this book is super silly, absurd, funny, hilarious, and none of those are buzzwords for me as we discussed. So this goes in the same category as A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it's a book that I know people really enjoy it, but I don't think that I would enjoy it. And that being said, I actually feel like it has low ratings on Goodreads, so I'm not even sure how many people like it to that extent. So given the fact that it's really funny and possibly not very good, I don't know, it just doesn't sound up my alley. I'm passing on this one. Try to convince me otherwise, but this one's a pretty hard no. After that, let's talk about The Android's Dream by John Scalzi. Now, I'm actually a fairly big fan of John Scalzi's work. I've enjoyed several of his books and have recommended them many times on my channel, but this is one of his earlier work. It's one that is less popular, and I think I know why, because I didn't really like it. I tried to start this book. Basically, it was on sale via Audible a while back, and so I bought the book for I think $5, and I listened to the first maybe 5 minutes of it, and there was immediately fart jokes that I was not into, and I immediately asked for a refund. Thankfully, Audible is pretty good about that. But yeah, this one just really turned me off. And again, it's one that has a lot lower ratings. I don't think it's its best. When people recommend John Scalzi's work, this is not the one they're recommending. And I know that it's meant to kind of make fun of the classic Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, but the connections, as far as I could read, were really loose. And this one just again sounded really absurd and funny. And while I like John Scalzi's work, I tend to like the ones that are on the more serious side, something like Lock-In. And this one was just the opposite. It kind of lacked plot, and or at least gave me that impression, and I wasn't feeling it. So I returned it and I've never looked back. Next, let's talk about Under the Dome by Stephen King, which of course is a sci-fi story with possible horror elements, but basically it's set in a city where this alien dome comes down around it and encapsulates the citizens. And this is also the plot of the Simpsons movie, which I enjoyed, but I don't think I want to read Stephen King's version of it, which I'm sure came out first. But as many of you know, I have a very hit or miss relationship with Stephen King to begin with. And in the past, I've read some of his science fiction like Cell, and I've learned that I don't really like how he does science fiction. He doesn't really make sense when it comes to his sci-fi elements. I just feel like he doesn't really know how to write hard science, or he attempts to write hard science very, very poorly. And I would rather him stick on the side of thrillers and horror and character studies. And I know this book is incredibly long. A lot of people say it's too long. And while some people do like it, pretty much everyone admits that the ending is horrible, which is not motivating me to pick it up. So given the fact that I tend to hate how Stephen King writes science fiction into his stories, and the fact that this one apparently has one of his absolutely worst endings ever, I am not motivated to spend that much time with that big of a book. Try to convince me otherwise in the comments, but I'm skeptical. And finally, I don't want to read The Road by Cormac McCarthy, this post-apocalyptic story that maybe crosses the line between science fiction and horror. So let me know if it falls on one side more than the other. But this is one I'm just not motivated to read because it sounds incredibly depressing. And for whatever reason, I just can never picture myself being in the mood for a story like this. Whether it be, again, more horror or science fiction, either way, I just want to pass and move along to something else. I'm interested in reading some of Cormac McCarthy's work because I've heard good things about it. But while this is considered a literary masterpiece, I don't think I'm going to have a fun time reading it. And there are so many other books that are dark and depressing that I'd rather read before this one. So maybe I'll read it before I die, but there's a lot of books between now and then, I hope. And this one is very, very low on that list. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know of the books I talked about. Are there any that you think I'm making a horrible mistake by not reading? If there's a book that you love, of course, and no disrespect, I'm happy that you love the book, but let me know in the comments if you actually think that I would enjoy it, or is it a good thing that I'm passing over these? Because again, it's not that these are bad or terrible books, but simply at this point, I know my reading taste pretty well, and I do try for the most part to avoid reading books that I think I'm just going to dislike, the books I'm going to give poor ratings and reviews to, and I'd rather find books that I love, books that I can recommend to you all. So I'd love to hear your comments down below if you agree or disagree with my picks here. And again, let's keep this super fun and relaxed. I mean, no hard feelings at all. And if you're new here and want to subscribe, I do read a lot of horror, science fiction, fantasy, and true crime and thrillers. And if you want to drop a comment, even if it's just a little emoji like an alien or a spaceship, that all helps me out. If you want to give me a thumbs up to show some appreciation for my unpopular opinions, I appreciate that too. And if you hit the little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.